Hi everybody, we are in the Massiel Shawl and we are going to start the border. So after the last row we are not turning the work. We will continue working around the short side of the shawl across the edge with the increase and the basic square. So we are going to rotate the shawl. We rotate it 19 degrees to the right, so the edge is facing us in the top of the work. And we are going to make the slip stitch into the space between the square. I will show you. Okay, so we have squares that this is the increase square and this is the basic square, increase square, basic square, and I'm going to make the slip stitch in the space between the squares here. So I'm starting with the increase. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 3. This is so this is the increase. And now the first slip stitch, we need to make it into the same chain as the last DC made. So I'm going to do it here. This is the last DC of the increase square. I insert my hook into the chain where the DC was made, the last DC, and make a slip stitch and then chain 6. So this is the chain square, the first chain square that we made in this row. Now repeat chain square into the space between squares to the corner. So I make slip stitch into the space, the next space between the squares, and chain 6 and slip stitch, chain 6. Get slip stitch, chain 6, slip stitch, and you see now I have a chain square across the edge of the shawl, the short side of the shawl, and I'm back to the corner to corner method. So I will continue, you can continue, slip stitch, chain 6, slip stitch, chain 6. Okay, so we continue, and I'm going to meet you when we arrive to the corner. So this is the corner. The corner is the first increase square that we made in the first row of the shawl. So I made a chain square all over the edge, and I'm now in the corner. I made a chain square into the corner. Actually, it's in the corner chain. It's the first chain we made of the first increase square. And to create the corner, I need to do chain square into the same space. So I slip stitch into the same space, to the same chain, and then chain 6. This made us a loop at the corner. Mark this as your corner chain. I put a slip stitch as a stitch marker in the chain 6 of the square. And now continue to the second increase basic edge into here. So I rotate a little bit and repeat chain square into the space between the squares across. So slip stitch and chain 6. Slip stitch, chain 6. Okay, continue to make the chain square until the end, and in the last square we are going to make the basic square. So in the last square, actually it's not a square, it's the last chain 3 space. We are making the basic square. Okay, and now you need to count your chain square. You need to have 68 chain square between the basic square and the my mark was taking off, between the basic square and the corner chain square, and again 68 in the other edge between the corner and the increase square. Okay, so now turn, and row 17 I'm making the increase square, repeat the chain square across to the corner, and in the corner I make the slip stitch of the chain square, okay, and then continue chain square and the basic square in the last square. So in this row the corner will be the slip stitch which make in the chain corner of row 70. So I will start. Slip stitch and chain 6. So you can continue, and I'm going to meet you in the end of the row. So in the end of row 17, we have a corner, a slip stitch corner, which is the slip stitch of the chain square. It was the second chain square rows, and we have a increase square in the start of the rows and basic square in the end of the row. Row 71 and row 72, it's a chain square row. It's two chain square rows. All the difference is just the corner. In the 71 we are going to make a slip stitch and then the chain 6, and the chain 6 will be the corner chain space. And in row 72 we are going to have another slip stitch corner. Don't forget the increase square in the start of the row and the basic square in the end of the row, and I'm going to meet you in the end of row 72. Okay, so we are in the end of row 72. We had the slip stitch as a corner, and we have 4 rows of chain square. And now I'm going to start the 73 row. I'll start with the increase. Increase square. And now I'm going to repeat the chain square and cluster square across to the corner square. So the chain square is a slip stitch in the next chain space and chain 6. And now the cluster square. So here's how we do it. Slip stitch in the next chain space. In this case it's 6 chain space. So slip stitch, chain 3. And now I'm going to make a 5 DC cluster above the slip stitch here. So yarn over, insert hook. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 not completed DC, and then yarn over and pull through all the 6 loop and then chain 2. This is the cluster square, and now I repeat the chain square. So slip stitch into next chain space, slip stitch, a chain 6, and another cluster square. So slip stitch into the next chain space, chain 3, 5 DC cluster above the next slip stitch, one, 2, 3, 4, and 5, yarn over, pull through all 6 loop, and then chain 2. So now we are going to repeat this two square, the chain square and the cluster square, across to the corner. So I reach the corner, and now I make a chain square, so slip stitch in the next chain space and chain 6, 1, 2, 3, and I mark this chain space above the corner as our new corner chain here. And now I may repeat the cluster square and the chain square across, and in the last square we need to work the basic square. So I start with the cluster, so slip stitch, chain 3, 5 DC cluster above the next slip stitch, 1, 2, 3, yarn and pull through all the loops, and then chain 2, slip stitch and chain 6. So you need to see that the corner is a symmetric corner, each side is the same. And now go on with the next of the row. I'm back to you. I finished the last repeat of the cluster square and chain square, and now I'm in the last square, and I work the basic square. Okay, and now in the end of this row, row 73, I have a wonderful cluster square all around. Okay, and in the middle, in the corner, I have a chain square. Totally you need to have 35 cluster each side. Next row, it's row 74. Actually it's another chain square row, but in the corner we are going to make another cluster square. So I start with the increase. And now I may repeat the chain square to the corner. I want just to show you another chain square. Okay, and now I need to do another chain square, but instead of start the slip stitch into the next chain space, I will make the slip stitch into the head of the cluster. So if this is the cluster, this is, I can see from the opposite side, the head of the cluster is here. It's not the eyes of the cluster, it's the head, and you see here all the loops in the same chain. So I work the slip stitch into this head of the cluster and then chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. and a chain square into the next chain 6 space. And now again chain square into the head of the cluster. So I slip stitch into the head and chain 6. And again, and the slip stitch into the head of the cluster, it's here, and chain 6. Continue to the corner and we are going to meet there. Okay, in the corner do the cluster square, but we need to work the cluster into the chain at corner of row 71. It's here. This will be around and over the chain of row 73 and the slip stitch of row 72. So I make a slip stitch, then chain 3, 5 DC cluster, you see, in this space, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yarn over and pull through all the 6 loops, chain 2, this is the cluster, and I make a continue with a slip stitch into the same chain 6. It will be here, the same chain 6 as the cluster. I made here a slip stitch and chain 6. Okay, let's do it. And now I place the stitch marker in the head of the cluster, and this will be the corner cluster. And now repeat the chain square across, and in the last square work the basic square. So slip stitch into the head of the cluster and chain 6, and then slip stitch into the chain 6 space and chain 6. Okay, and now you can continue to the end of the row. Okay, I finished row 74, and now the last row of part 6, we are going to make a chain square rows, but when we are come to the corner, we are going to make the slip stitch into the head of the cluster as we made in the last row, and this will be the last row of part 6. In the end of row 75 we have a nice chain square row. Of course, increase square and base, increase square in the start of the row and a basic square in the end of the row. In the corner, the slip stitch that we made into the head of the cluster is the slip stitch corner, and actually we are back to the C2C method, and we are going to finish with the in the next part with the last rows of the border. So have fun till the next part.